When the muzzle of my own well rod pressed between my eyes and the voice behind it used my real name, a name I hadn't heard in 18 months, I understood the mission had been compromised long before I stepped onto the canal bridge with the brass tube in my pocket. And the part that will haunt me is not that he meant to kill me, but that once upon a peacetime he had been the only friend I trusted with the truth I'm about to tell. But there was something I didn't know yet. They called me Northlake on the radios that pretended code names were life rafts, but my file in Baker Street began with Lieutenant Thomas Avery, late of Cambridge, then of the SOE, too fluent in German for anyone's comfort. My brief was brutal in its simplicity. Infiltrate the V2 signal chain along the Dutch coast, identify who was falsifying impact reports to make London bleed, and replace their lies with mine so the rockets that were already built would fail more mercifully. We could not stop the launches. We could only move a city by inches, enough to spare a school and sacrifice a warehouse, enough to turn a line of terraced houses into a row of broken windows instead of broken bones. It is a monstrous arithmetic. I tell you this first so you understand what kind of sin we were buying with cleverness, and why, on the night the canals froze and the moon looked like a scraped coin, I walked into a trap knowing a portion of it was mine. Amsterdam, in late 1944, had learned to whisper. The Germans loved order. The city loved disguises. Between the two, a man could vanish by wearing the wrong hat at the right angle. My contact was Lena van der Vliet, a courier with a bicycle that had outlived 3 chains and 1 lover. Her flat smelled of linseed oil and onions and carbon paper. You could taste resistance in the air. She gave me the tube, brass, scuffed, the length of a forearm, wrapped in a butcher's apron. Inside, a calibrated delay key and a set of frequency crystals for a portable beacon the Germans used to triangulate rocket fall. We weren't going to smash it. We were going to bless it with the wrong song. "You're sure about the engineer?" she asked, eyes the color of canals before dawn. Sure enough, I lied because tonight relied on a man who belonged to both sides so completely he was neither. His name, his current one, was Jacob Brandt, signals technician, Abwehr asset, and once, before Europe learned to grind names into meal, the boy who drank terrible beer with me near King's Parade and argued about whether truth was a compass or a mirror. Brandt ran the listening van that haunted an old tram depot by the IJ. From there he curled the sky into coordinates and telephoned them into the launch. Reports at The Hague. London's maps bled where Jacob pointed. My job was to unpoint him without dying, or worse, without making him choose in front of witnesses. We met on the bridge because he insisted on visibility. A man is braver when he knows the world might be watching. When I felt the well rod touch my brow, I didn't move. He did the talking. "Thomas," he said, his German neat, his English neater, "you always like the melodrama of bridges. Do you know how many men died for your habit?" I answered in the language we once shared across library tables. "Do you know how many children died for your sums?" He flinched very slightly, then recovered. "If I fire," he murmured, "the patrol will call it a suicide. If I don't." He left the sentence loose in the cold. Somewhere behind him a bicycle bell made a small, brave sound. I let my breath fog and said the only truth he'd respect. "I didn't come to kill you. I came to ask which version of you would like to live." He almost smiled. "You always were a cruel friend." Then he holstered the well rod, not because he had forgiven me, but because the calculation had changed. "Walk," he said. "Slow, we have company." His eyes cut left. 2 fell gendarmerie. 1 Dutch auxiliary I recognized and refused to. "If you run," he added, "I shoot. If you speak out of turn, I remember our college song and shoot anyway." It would be easier to tell you I felt nothing. I felt everything, like a wire pulled too tight under winter fingers. And just then, from the street behind Lena's building, a woman laughed, too bright for hunger, and the sound surprised me into a dangerous kind of hope. We threaded 3 alleys that smelled of coal smoke and boiled grief. The patrol trotted after us, happy dogs with muzzles. Jakob led me into the tram shed where he had made of wires and dials a chapel to the idea that numbers could save a man from deciding. The van sat in the middle like a sleeping animal. Antennas slumped, a heater ticking, a rack of receivers bent over their own hum. Jakob waved the patrol away with a nod he had practiced in mirrors. He shut the heavy door behind us and leaned his forehead against the cold metal. "God, Thomas," he said softly, "do you remember the river in June? How we thought there was time to become men before history demanded anything of us." "No," I said, because nostalgia is a kind of delay fuse, and tonight we were fresh out of those. "I remember you memorizing other people's opinions and calling that neutrality." He winced. "I am not neutral. I am divided." "Then tonight," I told him, "we move the cut." I took the brass tube from the apron and set it on his table between two maps stabbed with coordinate pins. "We feed them a beacon that lies. It buys us inches. I'll carry the filth of that arithmetic home." He stared at the tube the way a priest stares at a relic that might be false. "They'll listen for phantoms," he said. "They already do." I showed him the crystals, the delay key, the diagram. He understood in a breath. Jakob was always quick. "If they trace the phase error," he said, "they'll hang the operator who didn't check the math." "Which operator?" I asked. He looked at his hands. "Me," I shook my head. "Not if we write the error into the sky." He watched me for a long moment, the way a man looks through a shop window at a coat he cannot afford but might steal. "I can give you 6 nights," he said finally. 6? The Hauptmann rotates crews then. After 6 nights, I'm no longer the man you think you can save." He swallowed. "After 6, I'm someone else's arithmetic." I did not tell him 6 nights can be a lifetime when you're stealing angles from death. I did not tell him London has streets where an inch to the left means a child wakes to glass instead of never waking at all. I said, 6 is a mercy. He laughed once, a small, unkind sound meant for himself. "You always made mercy sound like punishment." He reached for the tube. His hand shook. He steadied it with the other, then slid the brass into a slot in the set that had been waiting, as if his days were a drawer designed for exactly this sin. "You'll need a second transmitter," he said. "If they triangulate only one, they'll doubt. 2 liars corroborate and become truth." He pointed at the tram platform. "Under there. Wires are already laid. Lena's people did it last month. She didn't tell you because she didn't trust me to still be yours." His mouth softened around her name. I watched his face discover that he loved a woman he had only ever met as a part of the job. "Jakob," I said gently, "we have an hour before their test tone. Help me make your regret useful." He nodded twice. "All right," he breathed, and for a moment the boy from Cambridge stood where the Abwehrman had been. But upstairs a door banged, and the floorboards carried boot grammar we both knew too well. 2 men, leather coats. A third, lighter on his feet, the Dutch auxiliary, quick to cruelty, always late to pity. Jakob's eyes flicked to the back stair, a foolish little ladder that remembered peacetime. "Go," he said. "I'll cough until you're gone." "They'll search," I said. "Then we hope they're lazy." He looked at me with the seriousness I reserve for God. "Thomas, you'll be caught if you leave by the canal. Go up and through the tailors, then left, then down. Do not look back." I didn't move. "And you? I'm tired of being both men. I'll pick one and pay." He smiled, and for the first time since the well rod I believed him. Boots reached the door. Jakob turned up the radio, found a German waltz, and began to sing along out of tune. The strangest, bravest stalling tactic I have ever loved. I went up the ladder and into the tailor's shop where a coat on a dummy watched me with scorn, through the left-hand door, down the private stairs, into an alley that remembered the last snow. I did not look back. On the street I walked like a man carrying bad news to people who expected it, because that is a gate the occupiers never stop seeing. Behind me voices rose and fell. I kept my hands visible, my face stupid, my pace unforgivably steady, and as I turned the corner by the bakery that sold bread made mostly of hope, I heard a gunshot that might have been a slammed drawer, and a laugh that wasn't Jacob's, and I understood 6 nights were going to cost us more than maps. We lit the first false beacon under a blacked-out sky that had learned to listen too closely. The V2 arc is a kind of prayer. It leaves, it falls, it returns. Our signal bent the return. We moved London by 70 yards south and 40 east. It doesn't sound like mercy until you have memorized the windows of a school. The launch came. The ground thumped like a giant's heart, and 20 minutes later our telephone game delivered numbers into the German reports that were true to the lie we'd written in the air. I marked the red pencil on Lena's paper map and felt sick and something like redeemed. She put a hand on the back of my neck the way one might steady a lamp in a wind. "How many lives is that?" she asked. "Enough tonight," I said. "Never enough tomorrow." She poured coffee that tasted like courage traded at a discount. "They came for Brandt," she said quietly. "He sang Wagner until they let him finish the aria." She smiled without pleasure. "Wagner is useful for exactly one thing." I said nothing, because the words in my throat had knives. They questioned him, they left him. He is still breathing. The coffee trembled on the table. He gave them a smaller truth to protect the larger one, I said. "He's good at that." "That makes two of you," she retorted, and I forgave her because she had earned the right to accuse me of cleverness. On the second night, the auxiliary found me instead of the patrol. He came out of a doorway with a pistol and a grin so practiced it had become a tic. "Meneer Avery," he said in a Dutch that tasted of borrowed uniforms. "Or do you prefer Northlake?" He had the look of a man who enjoys the first minute of a killing more than the last. I raised my hands. "You're early," I said. He tipped his head. "You're polite. You're in my way," I added. He laughed. I enjoy being in Englishman's way. He gestured with the pistol. "Walk." We went into a street that had learned to stay dark on command. He kept 3 paces back, a professional. "Tell me," he asked, "do you still think moving death around the map is kinder than stopping it? Do you still think wearing their badge makes you a man?" I countered. He sighed as if bored with my lines. "You know, Jacob begged me not to kill you on principle." "How generous," I said. "He made it sound like friendship," he added, a blade in his tone. "I told him friendship is an armor you have to take off to get any work done." He pressed the pistol into my spine. "Turn," I turned. He smiled, small. "Now run." "Why?" "Because I like to shoot moving things." That was when Lena's bicycle came out of the night like a miracle with rust. She rang the bell once, absurd, brave, and rammed him in the hip with the front wheel. The shot went high. He swore in a language that could sweet-talk a trap into closing. I went low and took his ankles because I have never been a good fighter, only a lucky one. The pistol skittered. He kicked me hard enough to silence next week. Lena hit him again, this time with the blunt honesty of a brick from her basket. He stopped being a problem. We pulled him into a doorway and left him with his decisions. "He'll get up," she said. "Then we keep moving," I said, and that is a philosophy too many men live by without asking who is under their feet. Night 3, 4, 5, each a different hymn to the same narrow mercy. We shifted the fall points. We listened to the German pilots complain about phantoms. We listened to mothers sweep glass and say thank you to God in voices that didn't believe it yet. On the 6th night, the patrol didn't come. The men who read reports did. An Abwehroberst with hair like winter and eyes like a clock stood in the tram shed with Jakob and asked him to explain why the sky had learned to lie. I did not see it. Lena did, through a crack in the door. "He looks like a schoolmaster," she whispered. "The kind who believes fear is educational." "It is," I said. "Just not for the lesson he thinks." We had one more switch to throw, one more song to teach the beacons. We needed 10 minutes. We got 3. The Oberst stepped out to take a call. The auxiliary who liked to shoot moving things limped in. Cheek bruised the color of bad plums. He grinned when he saw Lena in the crack. "Ah," he said. He moved fast for a man who had been introduced to a brick. I went through the door like a fool and a friend. He fired. The shot took the wall near my ear and put white sand in my hair. I reached for the well rod I had promised myself not to use again. He kicked it away with satisfaction. He raised his pistol for the second shot, the one he would enjoy. And then Jakob, who had been watching, did the worst and best thing he did in the war. He chose. He stepped between me and the muzzle and said, in the voice of a man asking a waiter for bread, "No." The auxiliary blinked, affronted. "Move!" "No," Jacob repeated, and then, "God save us," all the disguises fell away. "Thomas, finish the switch," he said in English, and the room understood its new geometry. The auxiliary laughed, delighted. "Oh, good," he said. "I do love a confession." He raised the pistol toward Jakob's face. Lena swung the bicycle bell again. It was ridiculous, and it worked once. But this time the auxiliary had learned. He shifted and fired into the bell. It sang horribly and died. Jakob moved like he was going to apologize to it. The Oberst came back in with a voice like weather and said, "Enough." The auxiliary froze, because men who enjoy the first minute of killings fear men who enjoy none of it at all. The Oberst looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a tumor. He looked at Jacob like a ledger item that had metastasized. "You're both very clever," he said. "Cleverness is tiring," he gestured. Two soldiers took Jacob by the arms. "You know he will not survive this," he told me conversationally, "and you will fail in front of him." I did something I do not recommend. I smiled. "You've given me a role to play," I said. "I never audition well under pressure." Then I threw the switch. We had already wired the second beacon to talk through the tram rails. When the switch went, the whole shed hummed like a cathedral throat clearing. The Oberst blinked once because the air had changed its grammar. Somewhere up the chain a launch officer raised a hand. Somewhere above the clouds a rocket listened and agreed to be wrong. The Oberst sighed, a polite man irritated by a bad violinist. "Shoot one of them," he said, and because the auxiliary was vain, he chose me. He raised the pistol. Lena stepped between us the way Jacob had, and in that second pride and love and duty and the whole library of motives shouted at once. Then the Oberst said, still conversationally, "Not her," and the auxiliary obeyed, and the shot went into the map behind me instead, making a red hole where a harmless square of water had been. The Oberst walked to the table, picked up the brass tube, turned it in his hands as if testing a melon at market, and placed it back with great care. "I disliked Wagner," he said to Jakob, "even before you made it a symptom." He nodded to the soldiers. "Take him." To me he said, "Run along, Englishman. You have moved London enough for 1 week." It was not mercy. It was contempt. It felt the same, and I used it the way a drowning man uses a rotten board. Jakob did not look back when they took him. He looked at Lena. He said something that might have been a promise and might have been an apology. I do not speak that dialect of defeat. Then he was gone, and the tram shed breathed like a chest that has learned bad news. Lena pressed the dead bell into my hand as if to give me back a choice. "Go," she said. "Go now." I went because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is survive long enough to be hunted at a later date. After the war, they asked me if our little lies had done any good. I think of one morning when a rocket fell into a deserted lot because the city council had been clever with bulldozers and we had been cruel with math, and a school 2 streets away rang its bell for lessons as if bells had never been asked to ring for other duties. I think of a warehouse where men swept glass and bled a little and went home to wives who had words left. I think of the letter that found me in 1947 with Dutch stamps and no return address. He didn't sing Wagner. He sang Schubert. It is different. He sang it badly. We made fun of him. He laughed. He did not tell them anything that mattered. It was signed L, and there was a pressed reed between the pages, the kind that grow where canals learn to remember being rivers. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to know where you're watching from. What city, which street, which window is yours tonight? Because I carried a city by inches once, and I'd like to imagine your window among the ones we saved or meant to. Tell me in the comments. It helps me believe this story still moves. Before you go, tap like, hit subscribe, and share this with one friend who believes small. Precise choices can change the map. Your support keeps these almost forgotten wheat stories alive.